Hello, my name is Esmeralda Sanchez Salazar, and I am a doctoral research assistant with HERC. Thank you for joining me as I present the results for patterns of time to reclassification for English learner students. In this presentation, we will discuss the background and the purpose of the overall study, as well as the specific research question this presentation is addressing. We will briefly discuss the details of the data and methods used for the study, and we will go into detail about the findings on the overall patterns of time to reclassification for Texas and the Houston area, as well as the patterns of time to reclassification for mobile and non-mobile students in Texas and the Houston area. Over the last 2 decades, the population of English learners in Texas public schools has grown rapidly from 14% to 20% of the overall student population. Although many ELs reclassify in a timely manner and are largely poised for academic success, there is a segment of ELs who struggle to reclassify despite years of involvement in various programs aimed at improving their English language skills. These students are often referred to as long-term English language learners, or LTELs. Research on LTELs is limited, but shows that LTEL students struggle academically and often report feeling stigmatized at school. In Texas, the EL population and their reclassification trends are increasingly emphasized by state and federal accountability standards, highlighting the need for further research. To contribute to local, state, and national understanding of LTELs, HERC, in collaboration with 10 public school districts in the Houston area, aims to better understand LTELs in Houston area public schools. This broader study is being conducted in 3 parts, examining descriptive profiles of LTELs and the schools that serve them, patterns and predictors of time to reclassification, and outcomes of LTELs. In this presentation, we focus on part 2 of this study, examining patterns of time to reclassification for EL students. Part 2 of the LTEL study examines true research questions. In this presentation, we address question 1. What are the patterns of time to reclassification for EL students? We break down question 1 into 2 parts. 1, what are the patterns of time to reclassification for EL students? We looked at patterns specifically for Texas and students in the Houston area. Then we explored whether time to reclassification is different for EL students who stayed in the same district from 1st through 12th grade and EL students who moved at any point within those years. In other words, mobile or non-mobile students. And we also looked at these patterns for Texas and students in the Houston area. We have 2 key takeaways for this part of the study. First, we saw similar patterns in terms of time to reclassification for Texas and the Houston area. Half of EL students reclassified by 6th grade. Second, mobility changed time to reclassification. Students who moved districts, or mobile students, reclassified later or not at all. To examine patterns of time to reclassification, we used data from the Education Research Center at the University of Houston, and we put together a sample of 5 first grade cohorts that started first grade in years 2001 through 2005, and who would have graduated in years 2012 through 2016. We then restricted the sample to students who were ever classified as EL. Note, EL students were identified based on their LEP status in the data. We analyzed EL time to reclassification for Texas and for the Houston area. For Texas, the total sample size was 401,920 students. For the Houston area, the total sample size was about 83,000 students. Finally, we used an analytic method known as survival analysis that is concerned with whether or when an event occurred. As part of our results, we will show a series of stair-step graphs that show patterns of time to reclassification for Texas and the Houston area. The horizontal axis represents time, specifically grade level for this study. This graph starts at grade 1 and ends at grade 12. The vertical axis represents the percent of students who remain EL at each grade level. For example, if we start at grade 1, 100% of students remained EL, meaning no students have reclassified. There are 3 things we want to focus on for each of these graphs. First, when or in what grade was the most common time to reclassify? In this stair-step graph, drops represent students experiencing reclassification between grade levels. Therefore, the biggest drop will show you when the largest group of students reclassified at one time, In other words, this is when reclassification was most common. Second, at what point are half of the kids reclassified? This is shown to be the median, where the line crosses a 50% marker. If we look at the 50% line and follow it down, we see that at grade 6, half of students remained EL. Third, what percent of students remained EL at the end of 12th grade and therefore never reclassified? This is shown as the last point on the graph. So let's begin with the results for the state of Texas. From the graph, we see that reclassification was most common between grades 3 and 4 for EL students in Texas. Again, this is when the largest group of students reclassified at one time. In addition, 50% of students who were classified as EL in grade 1 remained EL at grade 6. This also means that 50% of EL students had reclassified by grade 6. By grade 12, about 14% of students remained EL and either dropped out of our sample or never reclassified. To summarize our results, we see that for Texas, reclassification was most common between grades 3 and 4. In other words, this is when the largest group of students reclassified at one time. About 22% of students reclassified during this transition. In addition, half of EL students reclassified by 6th grade. And finally, 14% of students remained EL at the end of high school. Now we will move on to patterns of time to reclassification for EL students in the Houston area. For the Houston area, reclassification was most common between grades 3 and 6. About 15% of students reclassified at each of these transitions. For EL students in the Houston area, 6th grade was also the grade level when 50% of students remained EL, similar to the results for the state of Texas. By the end of 12th grade, 12% of students remained EL or never reclassified. This percentage was slightly lower than the state, where at grade 12, 14% of students remained EL. To sum up these Houston area results, we find that reclassification was equally as common for Houston area EL students in grades 3 through 6 compared to grades 3 through 4 for the state of Texas. About 15% of students reclassified at each of these transition points. We also see that half of EL students are reclassified by 6th grade. We see the same pattern for Texas area EL students, where half of students reclassified by 6th grade. In addition, 12% of students remain EL at the end of high school. This is slightly lower than the Texas area results, where 14% of students remained EL at the end of 12th grade. We now transition to comparing patterns of time to reclassification for students who stayed or moved from their 1st grade district. We examine whether moving districts at any point during an EL's 1st through 12th grade years changed EL's time to reclassification. We define students who stayed as students who remained in the same district from 1st grade through 12th grade. In other words, they never moved districts. We define students who moved as students who moved districts at any point between their 1st and 12th grade years. We start with patterns of time to reclassification for students in Texas. In this graph, students who stayed are represented in blue. Students who moved districts at any point are represented in orange. As you can see from the graphs already, there is a big difference between these two groups after 4th grade. We will start with the results of patterns of time to reclassification for students who stayed in the same district, 1st through 12th grade. For students who stayed in the same district, reclassification was most common between 3rd and 4th grade. About 29% of students reclassified during these transition years. At 5th grade, 50% of students who stayed in the same district remained EL. By 12th grade, nearly all students in Texas reclassified. Only about 4% of students remained EL in 12th grade if they stayed in the same district throughout their 1st through 12th grade schooling. We see a very different story for students who moved. For mobile students, reclassification was most common between 3rd through 6th grade. About 8 to 10% of students reclassified at each of these transitions. 50% of EL students did not reclassify until 9th grade if they moved districts, compared to 5th grade for students who stayed in the same district. By 12th grade, a third of students never reclassified, compared to 4% of students who were non-mobile. Moving on to mobile and non-mobile students in the Houston area. We found that reclassification was most common between 3rd through 6th grade for non-mobile students. In 5th grade, 50% of students remained EL in the Houston area if they stayed in the same district 1st through 12th grade, similar to the state level results. By the end of 12th grade, nearly all students reclassified if they stayed in the same district. Only about 2% of students who are non-mobile remained EL in 12th grade. Again, we see different results for students who moved districts at any point between 1st through 12th grade. Reclassification was most common between 5th grade through 6th grade for mobile students. 50% of mobile students did not reclassify until 8th grade, compared to 5th grade for students who stayed in the same district. This is also lower than the Texas level results, where 50% of mobile students reclassified at 9th grade. By 12th grade, 26% of students who were mobile remained EL or never reclassified. This is slightly lower than the Texas level results for mobile students, where a third of students remained EL if they moved districts. In summary, what we see from these mobile and non-mobile results is that staying in the same district all 12 years was particularly beneficial for EL students, and that moving districts at any point during these 12 years hindered students' reclassification. Overall, the results were similar for students in Texas and those in the Houston area specifically. However, there is some evidence that mobile students fared slightly better in the Houston area compared to EL students across the state of Texas. To conclude, most EL students reclassified by middle school. However, changing districts delayed reclassification. To continue with this line of inquiry, we will next examine other factors that may influence time to reclassification, such as home language, which EL program that student participates in, and special education status. Finally, we aim to examine how time to reclassification is related to students' educational outcomes. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to sharing more results on EL time to reclassification in the future. If you have any questions or additional comments, please contact Lizzie Casciola or me, Esmeralda Sanchez Salazar, at the email address shown here. Have a wonderful day.